Hello and welcome to the class of monthly current affairs, that is recitals in depth. Here we will be covering key topics from science and technology section featured in the month of August. We'll explore the type of telescopes, especially the Growth India telescope recently which captured an astonishing asteroid. Then we will learn why there is a craze of genetic screening which is increasing among the athletes. Then what are the unique kind of organisms named as extremophiles? Then what is dysbiosis, which could be caused due to abuse of antibiotics? Then what is the phenomena of super blue moon? What are forever chemicals, which was a featured topic in Prelims 2024 this year? And some other interesting concepts. To understand more in detail, stay tuned. So let's see what do we have for the month of August. So there are these topics which were featured primarily. There were many other topics, but the most high yielding ones, those which have been asked in some of the patterns or themes of PYQ, this is something that we also cover in the Recitals magazine. So it is namely Growth India telescope, what are retroviruses, genetic screening, osmolite, what is californium, what are extremophiles, what are prokaryotes, how are they different from eukaryotes, and what is forever chemicals, which is also PFA, something which was asked in prelims. Then what is dysbiosis, another implication of abuse of antibiotics along with antimicrobial resistance. Then what is the world's first thorium molten salt nuclear power plant, and if at all we are using thorium, what kind of technology does it require, and does India has any nuclear power plant which can get thorium or which can have thorium as a fuel? So we will discover that. Then what is a nano generator technology, sub-zero temperature batteries, what is super blue moon, something which is rarely occurring, and then what is heaviest antimatter, what is quantum non-locality. So we will be reading across multiple themes of science and tech, the biotechnology, the space technology, the applied physics, the basic physics, chemistry. We will be reading about some of the defense aspects also, and we will also look into some of the emerging technologies over here. So our first topic is Growth India telescope. Why was it in news in the month of August? Because it captured the image of a transient event. A transient event which was actually a passing asteroid, passing very frequently, and it was able to capture images of the same. It is also one of the highest observatories across the world, and when we are talking about this telescope, first of all, please understand that telescope is anything which converges the images of distant object, for example, galaxies, far off stars, neutron star, black hole, etc. But the telescopes could be of two types. Telescopes are either astronomical telescopes and terrestrial telescopes. Here, when I am talking about the Growth India telescope, it is obviously because it is capturing the space-bound transient event, it is an astronomical telescope. What is the working principle behind a telescope anyway? So, telescope is something which was first of all discovered by who? It was discovered by Galileo Galilei. So, when Galilei discovered it, he discovered it in 1608 for the purpose of analyzing and studying about the satellites around the Jupiter. So to study the satellites of Jupiter, Galileo for the first time created a telescope, an astronomical telescope. It is based on the principle of using convergence power of biconvex lens. So convex lenses are used, 2 in number. In the case of astronomical telescope, when it receives images, when it receives the light from very far off object, from let's say infinity, then it converges it to the focal point, which means it further diminishes the image. It further diminishes the image. It is still large enough for us to be perceived by the human eye. So therefore, we use another one with a smaller focal length f2. And then again, the light goes inside the second lens and converges it further, making it a very, very small object, and therefore it is very easily perceivable. The only thing is, when we are receiving light from a far off object, the kind of image, the nature of image in this case, in the case of using convex lenses, is always real and inverted. So we get the inverted images. But if you use the terrestrial bound telescopes, you must have seen that you are seeing everything upright. They are not inverted. The reason for that is we use three lenses. We use three convex lenses in the case of terrestrial telescope. In the case of terrestrial telescope, another lens or a kind of inversion lens is introduced over here. And because of it, another image is created which is real and at the same time it is erect. So erect image is created in the case of terrestrial telescope, but inverted image is created in the case of astronomical telescope. So you have understood that this is a telescope. Who has discovered the telescope, and what are the two types of telescope, what are the working principles, which kind of lenses are used. This is the basic fundamental physics which is important. Which applications uses concave lenses or concave mirrors or convex lenses and concave mirrors. So these are important for you to study. Anyway, we have talked about astronomical telescope. Now let's bring our focus into what growth India does. So what is this growth exactly? So growth is a part of space diplomacy where multiple countries are coming together and they are collaborating in order to find something. What is that something? In this particular case, it is studying the transient events happening in the universe. To understand it better, let's first understand what does growth stands for. So growth stands for Global Relay of Observatories watching transient happen. So what is it exactly doing? It is analyzing the transient events, and it is a global relay, which means it is a network of satellite. First of all, what is a transient event? What is a cosmic transient event? So have you used a camera? A camera, when it puts a flash or when you put the flash on, actually nowadays it is not prevalent in current cameras, but back in the days when we used to have Kodak cameras, they used to have a sparking flash and that flash used to last for some seconds, if you remember that. That event is very flashy, very energetic, emitting out energetic light, but at the same time it is very transient. It is lasting only for a very short period of time. These events, imagine your camera flash. That is a transient event and it keeps happening across the world. What sources creates these camera flashes of universe or these transient event? It could be merger of two neutron stars, because these two neutron stars are merging. They lead to bursting of very high energetic light for a very short span of time. Or let's say supernova or nova explosion happens, something which we have read in the previous recitals. So we have learned what is nova explosion, what is supernova explosion. It is basically explosion of a star. While before turning into black hole, it actually burns into a very big mass. It creates a very big ball of fire kind of a thing. And that is known as a supernova explosion. To understand the working principle behind nova and supernova explosion and which kind of stars become supernova or undergo supernova, it is highly recommended that you go and watch the video of previous month's recital, Science and Tech. So it could be either, first of all, it could be either neutron star explosion, two binary stars are exploding with each other, or supernova explosion is happening, or sometimes also created due to a passing asteroid. So what we have observed in this case, we have observed a passing asteroid which has created a flash for a small period of time. So what does relay means? So imagine yourself holding hands with a chain of people. The last point is connecting, let's say, a part of North Delhi, and the second part is connecting, the last person is connecting a part of South Delhi. Because you all are connecting hands, you are able to connect South Delhi from North Delhi. So what are we doing? Without moving, we are able to watch something which is ranging over a very vast distance. This is what the Growth telescope also does. So Growth is basically a partnership which is led by USA, especially the National Science Foundation of USA, which is a 5-year project to collaborate globally across the countries for applied sciences. But mind you, This is for all the science domain except for medical science. So growth will not work in the field of medical science, except for that for physics, chemistry, astronomy, etc. It will be working. Now why India is collaborating? Because there is a tie-up between India and USA, which is under the name of PIRE, Partnership for International Research and Education. Under this, India and USA collaborates. USA funds some of the part of India's observatories in order to become a part of this growth project. So this is also an example of what? Space diplomacy, something which we've already read in the previous recital. So now, talking about Growth India project, where is it located? If this is a telescope, an astronomical telescope, where is it located? It is located at the very prime observatory, space observatory of India, which is situated at Ladakh. And which district of Ladakh? The Hanle district of Ladakh. So there is Indian Astronomical Observatory, which is situated over here. It has got multiple kind of radio and astronomical telescope along with Growth India telescope. This one is created by Indian Institute of Astrophysics and IIT Bombay. It is funded by Department of Science and Technology. So these are some of the facts which might be useful in state PCS and UPSC examination. Now, coming back to why do we need to create a relay? So what happens with the transient event? They generally are only observable during dark skies. Because the more darker it is, the more likely you will be having a better clarity of light or a flash, which is only going to last for some time, right? So let's say there is night in this part of the world, but eventually the night will grow to this part in the second half of the day. So what will happen? If I will create an observatory across multiple continents, across different continents, and connect them with each other, I will be able to relay or connect or communicate the data across from one part of the earth to another. So which means we will be able to utilize the darkness or the night fully across the globe. That is the idea of growth, because if I want to capture the transient event, the primary essentiality is to have darkness across, and nothing better than having it across the globe. So when there is darkness over here, these two observatories will be functioning. When the darkness or the night will occur over here, these three will be functioning. And therefore, collectively, we will be able to create a better and a more clearer picture of something which will give us the transient information. And this will help us to explore the secrets of the universe. For example, understanding about how binary neutron stars collide, how asteroid is passing, with what speed, what is the name, could lead to discovery of asteroids, could make us understand what are supernova explosion, which star is exploded. So all of this we are able to capture with the help of Growth India telescope. Okay. So how many countries are involved in this project? So let's start from here. So here we have got Japan. We have got Japan and we have got Taiwan. So in the eastern part we have got Japan and Taiwan. Then in the southeast we have got India. Then in the Middle East we have got Israel. In the Europe we have got two countries. One is UK and second is Germany. And in the western part of the world only one country is a part of it, the primary funder, which is United States. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 countries are party to Growth India telescope because they have got astronomical observatories which are interconnected with each other, also known as the relay observatories. Now, having understood about the concept and the working principle behind the telescope, should we also read about the various types of telescope that are prevalent, especially the astronomical telescopes that are prevalent across the world? So these can be classified first of all. The types of telescope that are placed internationally, and then the Indian telescopes we will be reading as well. First of all, when I am reading about telescope, it is meant to capture something which is coming from a light which is coming from very, very distant place. Now, if I talk about the spectrum of energy or spectrum of light, it varies from gamma rays, which is having the lowest of wavelength and highest frequency, to the short waves, which are having lowest frequencies or the highest of wavelength. If I will arrange them in an order, always remember it is gamma first, then X-rays, then UVs, then infrared, and between infrared and UV there is the visible light, then there is FM, then there is short wave, then there is AM, etc. So we are more concerned about the places of universe which are rapidly emitting a lot of energy. Can you guess some of the celestial objects like that? It could be neutron star, it could be black hole. We've recently got a picture of it. We have got the binary stars, we have got the asteroid systems. Not just asteroid systems, we have also got the supernova, the nova explosions. We have got the white dwarfs busting. So these stars are basically emitting what? They are emitting energy which is of very, very high frequency. So for us, when we are trying to locate something, when we are trying to observe something, it's not just the visible wavelength which should be concerning us. Not everything in the universe is having the visible wavelength. Many things are having hidden wavelengths. For example, the gamma wavelength, the X-ray wavelength, the infrared wavelength. So we have to make our telescope sensitive to these invisible wavelengths as well. And therefore, this is how we classify multiple types of telescope. And this is how we classify the multiple types of telescope. Now let's say if the telescope is able to capture the gamma rays which is of the highest frequency. So highest frequency waves would be coming from where? From the black hole, from the neutron stars, right, from the quasars, etc. Very, very highly energetic objects, right? So these will be the gamma rays and they will be captured. Now these gamma rays, because they are so high in energy, they will very easily get absorbed in the atmosphere or not. So if they are easily absorbed in the atmosphere, definitely we will not be able to locate them. We will not be able to observe them from the terrestrial base. So where do we need to deploy the telescope? The placement of gamma ray telescopes are always done at high altitudes, be it with the help of balloons or be it with the help of satellites or be it with the help of launching vehicles. So we have got space-based gamma telescopes. If it is able to observe the X-rays and the ultraviolet rays, they come from stars, asteroid systems, white dwarfs. So these are also placed at high altitude. Then we have got visible light. Visible light are not much used because visible light is the most basic kind of telescope, something which was used by Galileo, something which was used by very, very primitively basically, just in order to understand and observe the color of the planets. It made us understand that the sun appears yellow and Mars appears red and Venus appears in a certain color. So the colors are visible over here, but they are not able to capture the other parts of the universe which are hidden, which could be discovered primarily with the help of microwave telescope. So you know that there is something which is known as cosmic microwave background, that the entire world is wrapped under a microwave which is not visible but it is prevalent. In fact, 90% of the universe is made up of it. So in order to observe it, microwave telescopes are used. Then having lesser frequency telescopes which are radio telescope. Radio telescope is something which will be able to capture the cooler things, for example, the asteroids, planets, or some icy objects which will not be emanating very high frequency. So to capture them, we use radio telescope, one of the most prominently used telescopes. Then square kilometer array, a very important telescope, in fact the largest telescope of the world. Square kilometer array captures the light in an area of 1 million square kilometer. Just imagine 1 million square kilometer. In this large area which could be spanning up to the entire area of UK, in this large area we will be capturing the images with the help of again array of telescopes which are relayed or connected together. So where are they located? It is located in 2 continents. One is Africa. It will be located in Africa and Australia. So relay of satellites will be there in square kilometer array. Next is the Spitzer Space Telescope. This is for analyzing the infrared waves. The Hubble Space Telescope, one of the first telescopes, and under which wavelength does it work? Is it able to work under UV ray, X-ray, gamma ray, which ray? Hubble Space Telescope was the first to be created for visible wavelength. Please remember, because it could come and match the column. Then the James Webb Telescope, this is to understand the mysteries of our solar system only and to understand how the Earth-like objects or exoplanets look like. So these are some of the telescopes. Now talking about the Indian telescopes. So there is one Indian telescope, the Chandra telescope. It is actually used internationally, but the Chandra telescopes are able to capture the X-ray wavelength only. Okay, and in the case of Hubble, what do we see? That the Hubble telescope is able to capture in the visible light only. What if I require a telescope which could capture in all across the wavelength, all across the spectrum? That is a kind of multispectral telescope, and the first multispectral telescope that was created by India was AstroSat, created in the year 2016. And what is the speciality? It is multispectral. The next one is Giant Meter Wave Telescope. This is located near Narayangaon, Pune. It is a radio telescope because it captures the meter waves. So meter waves are those waves which are under radio frequency. Next is the Himalayan Chandra Telescope, the Hagar Telescope, which captures the gamma rays, and the Cherenkov Telescope. Please remember, the Chandra Telescope, Hagar and Mace, these words could be asked, and you will be asked that what are these things. So these are the astronomical telescopes, which are all of them, along with Growth India Telescope. All of them are located where? They are located in Hanle. They are located in Hanle, which is also declared as the Dark Sky Reserve. Dark Sky Reserve. To preserve the natural darkness of this area, the more darker the area would be, the more visible the celestial objects would be, the better performance of the astronomical observatories would come out to be. So therefore, this is a Dark Sky Reserve of India, the only Dark Sky Reserve. In fact, it is situated in Hanle, Ladakh. It is called the Indian Astronomical Observatory, of which all of these telescopes are a part of. There is one more word associated with measuring the darkness. How dark is the sky? Because night or light pollution is also a thing. The lighter the room is, the lesser visible the celestial or the far off objects would be. You can practice it your own. The moment you see that there is a lot of pollution, the sky nearly becomes invisible. But the more clearer the sky is, you will be able to see the shiny, brighty stars. So what is the measure of this darkness? It is done with the help of Bortle's scale. Now another important concept which has been asked in the PYQ is the difference between meteors, meteoroids and meteoroids. What is the difference? We'll understand all of it in great detail. Also, what are asteroids and what are comets? So please imagine that it's not just the planet but also some of the broken parts of planets or some of the rocky objects which are unwaveringly floating in the solar system, also in the universe, but more importantly we are concerned with the solar system. So let's say these are some of the objects which are revolving around the sun. Let's say this is the sun, and these are revolving around the sun in highly elliptical orbit. Highly elliptical orbit, which means that let's say when it is very far off from the sun, because it is not under the influence of the heat energy of the sun, it will naturally be very frozen. But the moment it will start coming nearer to the sun, this ice will start, the frozen ice will start to get melted away. As a result, natural vapors will come off and you will see what we call as the comets. So what are the comets? Comets are the frozen icy bodies which revolve around the sun in highly elliptical orbits, and when they come nearer to the sun, what happens? They emit out the gases which are known as comet tails. Okay. Next one is asteroid. Asteroids are larger than the comets. They are larger than the meteor, the meteoroid, the meteoroids, but they are smaller than the planets, and also they are not habitable. So these are just the bare rocky masses which are smaller than the planet, and they are also orbiting the sun. Of course, they are not orbiting in that elliptical orbit. In fact, they have got a particular address. Do you know which address is this? Where exactly is the asteroid belt located in the solar system? You tell that to me in the comment section, because it is very basic general knowledge. Anyway, once we know about the address, of the asteroid, what happens is, sometimes under the influence of a particular planet, they get carried away under the gravitational pull. What happens, let's say I am the Earth and some asteroid got pulled towards me. Because of this gravitational pull, it might enter my atmosphere. And also because of the gravitational pull, before even entering the atmosphere, it might break off into multiple pieces. Basically, smaller pieces, smaller fragmented parts or those rocky bodies which are trying to enter into the Earth atmosphere, they are known as meteoroids. So because we are taking them from asteroids or from comets also, but primarily from asteroid, therefore they are known as meteoroid. Okay, meteoroid. The next one is, let's say we have seen this mass of body entering inside the Earth's atmosphere. Earth's atmosphere is very ruthless. It imposes a lot of friction into these bodies. So naturally, because of this large friction, it will start burning this particular body. Because you see something which is burning, you will see as if a star is flowing by, as if something which is very bright, a transient event is flowing by. So this is known as meteor. Meteor, which is a streak of light seen when a meteoroid heats up in the atmosphere. Why? This is because of burning of the meteoroid. Now, if at all it manages to escape the ruthlessness of our atmosphere and it manages to hit the ground, then it is known as meteoroid. Meteoroid. So I hope the difference is clear to you. What is a comet, asteroid, meteoroid, meteor and meteoroid. Coming to the next topic. The next topic is retroviruses. So this has been in news because recently the researchers have found that 8% of the human genome is comprising of zombie regions. These zombie regions are comprised of the retroviruses. So which means 8% of the human genome is comprising of retroviruses. Now what are viruses? Viruses are highly infectious bodies which have got a very high capacity of replicating. But how is it different from bacteria or other microorganisms? Is by the fact that it is not having the capacity to self-replicate, which means it always needs a host to feed upon, and then only it will be activated. Just imagine that this is a mic holder, and if a virus is sitting on it, it is not harmful for anybody. It will not be able to infect this one. But the moment I touch it and it gets contact of an organelle or an organism, it will be infecting. Why? Because it is not self-replicating. It needs a host to replicate. And this is not so in the case of bacteria and fungi because they are self-replicating in nature. But thank God viruses are not so, because viruses are most highly infectious microorganisms. To what extent can they penetrate? They can not only enter an organism, but they can also enter the human genome. They can also enter the genome of an organism and alter that. They have the capacity to do that as well. And a particular type of virus that has been found to be doing it is the retrovirus. Do you know a typical disease which is created due to the infection of retrovirus? This is HIV/AIDS. HIV/AIDS can also be inherited. So basically, these viruses have the capacity to attack the genome, the very gene of an organism, and can inherit from generation to generation. They can be both harmful and non-harmful also, because in this particular case, researchers have found that while in our genome we have got 8% strands of such zombie regions. Zombie regions means something which could be harmful, but it is dead right now. So this is a strain of retrovirus. But it is not able to replicate itself, and therefore, while it is there in our genome, because of the evolutionary processes, it is not replicating, hence not harmful for us. But the activated retroviruses are very harmful. Now, we will understand about the different type of viruses, how are they classified, and more about the retrovirus. Now, viruses are typically microorganisms which consist of 3 layers. First of all, it inherits its information in the form of a genetic material. This genetic material could either be RNA or could either be DNA. So, viruses could be of 2 types, DNA viruses, RNA viruses, okay, depending upon the genetic material. This genetic material is now closed inside. This genetic material is now closed inside a protective layer which is known as capsid. Then it is further enclosed by another lipid layer. This is known as the layer of lipid. And this is how the entire genetic information inside a virus is protected. The moment it gets in touch with an organism, this lipid layer breaks off and the capsid attaches itself with the next cell, with the target cell, and then further transfers the genetic material. This leads to high infectious rate of the viruses. The classification of viruses, like all the other organisms, have been done on the basis of how different their structures are from each other. So, clubbing them into 7 groups, it was Baltimore who classified viruses for the first time. So, this 7 grouping classification of viruses has been done by Baltimore, also known as the Baltimore classification. You will be also interested to know the discoverer of the retroviruses. Who discovered it the first? It was Baltimore only. Okay, now we will see how viruses are classified. First of all, on the basis of genetic material, whether it is an RNA, ribonucleic acid, or deoxyribonucleic acid. What do we have in humans? What is packed in the chromosomes? Is it the RNA or the DNAs? We have got the DNAs, but in the viruses, it could be both RNA, it could be DNA. Second is the structure of the chromosomes or the genetic material. Is it single-stranded? It is single-stranded, or is it double-stranded? So, depending upon the structure, the alignment of the chromosomes also, these viruses could be divided. The third is whether it is a positive sense virus or whether it is a negative sense viruses. Now, what happens? Generally, what is DNA? DNA is the entire address, the entire information about a person given in one simple molecule. That is a DNA. It comprises of, let's say, my name, my gender, my age, to which school did I go, to which college did I go, where did I study from, what were my marks, how will I look like, what will be the color of my skin. Everything will be covered in my DNA, everything. But let's say you want to fetch one information from it. You want to fetch my address. Now, in that case, will you be copying the entire DNA again and again? No. You just want to cut that particular information, create a copy for it, because you don't want to alter my DNA, right? You just want to copy and you want to paste it out of the place where all of this data is packed. So, this data is packed in nucleus. So, I will be putting it out of that nucleus, and then I will, through this information, I will be creating something. Now, you could be utilizing this address to maybe, let's say, order something, or maybe to visit, or maybe to use it somewhere. So, this is biologically how the DNA replicates itself into something which is useful right now, which means, let's say, a person is infected by a disease. Now, DNA knows how to fight with it because DNA has already seen such episode. So, how to pick up that particular lesson from that particular episode and to create that out of the DNA and then replicate it into protein so that we create enough number of antibodies. That is done with the help of transcription process. So, transcription process is the creation of RNAs from DNA, where a particular desired code of information is brought out of the nucleus into the cell, consumed by the ribosomes, and then ribosomes create proteins out of it to manifest the function for which it was coded, right? So, the process of conversion of DNA to RNA is very natural, and this process is known as transcription. The reverse process will be known as reverse transcription, but naturally this is not a suo motu process. This will not happen naturally. So, for this, our body makes a separate kind of enzyme. Enzymes are the facilitators which do something which is abnormal. So, let's say now I want to create RNA, I want to create DNA out of RNAs. I want to create DNAs out of RNA. In that case, I need to synthesize something. So I need maybe, let's say, a Fevicol or a glue kind of something which could bring up all the RNAs together, pack it in the form of DNA. So that enzyme, that paste is known as reverse transcriptase, and the process is known as reverse transcription. Now, the next process is the RNA would be converting into protein, and this is known as the process of translation. Because now the DNA and the information which was desired is finally translated into the form in which it was required. Okay? So we have understood transcription and translation, in which comes first what is reverse transcriptase and what is reverse transcription process. Now what happens? In case of some of the viruses, the translation happens without the process of transcription, which means the RNA is there and the RNA itself is getting converted into protein. This process or these kind of viruses are known as positive sense viruses. What are the negative sense viruses? These are those which requires the transcription process and then the translation process happens. These are known as negative sense. So without translation, they cannot create the protein. I hope we've understood that. So on the basis of these three metrics, we've got 7 classification. The double-stranded DNA, single-stranded DNA. Double-stranded DNA, of course, is the most complex form of viruses. What are the examples? Adenovirus, very important one. We will be looking the significance in the next slide. So please be watchful. Adenoviruses, herpes viruses, pox virus. These are all the examples of double-stranded DNA virus. Okay? Then there is single-stranded DNA virus. This is not important. Double-stranded RNA, not important. Sense virus, positive sense, not important. Negative sense virus. Negative sense virus is also not important. Now, the single sense RNA reverse transcription viruses. Reverse transcription viruses means that from RNA, these are the RNA viruses which will be getting converted into DNA with the help of reverse transcription process. So this is retrovirus, and classic example of retrovirus, always remember it is HIV. But it is not just something which causes HIV. It is not something which only causes such diseases but could also cause cancers in bodies. So the reasons for cancers could be so many things, could be lifestyle disorders, etc., but could also be due to infection of viruses, especially the retrovirus. So there are 2 classifications of retroviruses. One is the cancer causing virus, which is oncoviruses. They cause very rapid replication of the growth cells of body. And second is the lentiviruses. Lentiviruses are responsible for slow growing diseases, for example HIV/AIDS. So oncovirus ka example, leukemia, blood cancer, and lentivirus example, HIV/AIDS. So I hope retroviruses are clear to you. Now we will quickly understand the process of how the entire pasting or affecting of human genome happens because of retroviruses. So what we've understood is that they are the RNA viruses which will eventually get converted into reverse transcriptase DNA viruses. This DNA, when it will enter inside the human cell, they will copy paste themselves with the help of another glue. This glue is known as integrase. So when they enter inside a cell of a body, they will now try to glue themselves with the existing DNA. This is the existing DNA. It will glue itself and it will paste itself. Now, if it is transferred to the embryotic cells, the sperm cells, then in that case, they will be transferring from one generation to another and they will be replicating it. And therefore, now they have found that 8% of our genome is made up of these zombie regions. Why zombie? Because these are passive. They are not replicating, they are not infectious in nature. But yes, some of the remnants of the retroviruses are inherently present in yours and mine genome. 8% of it. Now, let's understand the significance of the topic we've just now read by analyzing UPSC PYQ. In the year 2021, Question was, bacteria, fungi, virus can be cultured in artificial or synthetic medium. Cultured means could be multiplied, could be replicated. You know that bacteria is self-replicating, fungi are self-replicating, but what about virus? I just gave you example of this mic and me. So the viruses are not self-replicating, they need a host, they need a living host. So except for 3, you eliminate 3 and you get the answer on the basis of conceptual clarity. Second question asked again in 2021, adenoviruses have single-stranded DNA genomes, whereas retroviruses have double-stranded DNA genomes. We know that this is incorrect. Why? Because at least for retrovirus, you have heard that for retroviruses, these are the RNA genomes, which further gets reverse transcripted into DNA. Right? And in the case of adenoviruses, we already read that these are the most complex structure of viruses, double-stranded ones. So this is also, the statement is also incorrect. Second is common cold is sometimes caused by adenovirus, AIDS is caused by retrovirus. So it is sometimes, so it is a light statement. And second, AIDS is caused by a retrovirus, absolutely factual, and just now we have read about it. So the correct answer is B only. The next topic is genetic screening. In this topic, we will read first of all, why is it in news, what is the importance of genetic screening, and what are the different types of genetic screening. Screening, what is it? It is basically testing. So I'm testing myself genetically, and that is what genetic testing or genetic screening stands for. It has gained traction among the athletes, especially before the Olympics 2024, where a lot of athletes were found to be doing the genetic testing of themselves. So genetic screening rapidly became a very important and popular test all across, especially among the athletes. What is the relevance? In genetic testing, we are trying to test the genetic abnormalities, probability of any mutation, or the genetic composition of the body, and with the help of which we will be able to predict if at all we can get any disease, we will be able to prevent it beforehand, and we will also be able to do the family planning so that the offsprings wouldn't be getting it. But why is it utilized by the athletes? So what is the importance of genetic screening in sports? First of all, it acts as a very good genetic marker of their performance. Genetic marker of their performance. It is said that if an athlete is known to have the ACE gene or the ACTN3 gene, then they will be having better endurance power very naturally. Also, you must know that while we say that yes, practice, motivation, the diet, and the other things, nutrition plays a very big role in analyzing or assessing an athlete's performance. 66% of an athlete's performance is actually determined by genetics alone. 66%. So in order to train them better, in order to provide more personalized solution, the coaches also prefer for genetic screening of their candidates or the athletes. So first of all, it very naturally provides a genetic marker of their performance. Second, upon performance, they might also require recovery. Quicker the recovery, the better they will be on the next day of the sport, right? And the better they will be on the next day, they will be able to come across as a more suitable player as compared to the others, more competitive and more durable as compared to the other players. So naturally winning over gaining a kind of genetic advantage. So recovery or other things are also ensured, whether they are not getting injuries are also ensured by genetic markers. For example, collagen. Somebody has got more collagen production, naturally they will be undergoing through lesser ligament injuries, etc. Okay, and the recovery would also be better. Second, it also ensures their psychological strength. So their psychological markers, for example, their stress endurance, their pain tolerance, these are also something which we inherit genetically. For example, the people of the Himalayas, the people who are living in more rough terrain, they are more muscular, they are more they are less susceptible to pain, they are more tolerant towards stress and pains, etc. in their body. So these are the psychological markers as well, how well they are able to manage the stress and pain. And this will also help the coach to provide them more personalized guidance. This will also help them to analyze their metabolism, whether it is quick, whether it is fast or slow, in which area they have to be worked upon, that can be analyzed very easily with genetic screening. But of course, with that also comes some of the cons, some of the ethical concerns. So, what are the negative sides of genetic screening? This is a very crucial private information. So, the abuse of which could lead to issues of privacy. So, issue of privacy is there. What is the second issue? Their information could be exploited and it can be misused. Third one, they can be commercially exploited. They can be commercially exploited. And third one, do we also agree that they might undergo discrimination? So even if they are motivated enough, if they are naturally or inherently, but if they are inherently or naturally genetically strong, then in that case they might be discriminated. Some of such things have been already put in light in this Olympics. You must have seen some of the examples. I will prefer not taking the names, but yes, the genetic discrimination has also been seen. Along with that, over focusing on it will overshadow the other important aspects of the game. For example, right diet, nutrition, consuming right nutrition and doing practice and having right motivation and will to perform better. So it will overshadow the other aspects of the sports as well, and it will become a very mechanical. And more importantly, this is not an ethical concern, but the research is not good enough. It's not well done right now because the researchers have only been done on a very small sample size. Small sample sizes result cannot be generalized over larger population, which means that the direct correlation between genetic strength, mental strength and their sports performance, they cannot be directly correlated with each other. So what is the need of the hour? First of all is to have a bolstered and an independent research which could rightfully acknowledge that there is a correlation, or to which extent there is a correlation between a person's performance and genetic composition. So first of all is an independent and fair research, which should also be regulated. The outcomes of this research and the use of genetic screening should also be now intervened by regulatory bodies, as there is growing importance of it. So with regulatory bodies, there will be an oversight. There will be an oversight on the genetic screening use and also check the misuse of these screening processes. Third is education on the interpretation of the data needs also be done, especially for the coaches. Because if they are not rightfully or if they are not correctly interpreting the results of the genetic screening, then it is of no good use. So this needs to be educated, because till now we do not have formal training of the coaches about how to interpret it. It is rather very scarce and very casual in nature. So it needs to be formalized. The education needs to be formalized to improve the interpretation of such results. Next is to have ethical guidelines. Why are ethical guidelines needed? Because we have already seen the issues of privacy. We have already seen the issue of breach of interpretation, commercialization of this data, and discrimination. So there should be strict guidelines as to how to treat this data on the ethical lines. And then finally, in order to boost the performance, yes, we do agree that genetic screening plays a good role, but there has to be a holistic approach in preparing an athlete. So always go for the holistic approach. Holistic approach towards ensuring the performance, which should not only check their genetic concerns, but also check their nutrition, their diet, their motivation, which means their psychological state, should also check amount of practice they are taking. So with the help of this One Health approach or this holistic approach, you'll be able to prepare the athletes better. So this is about genetic screening. Now coming to the question, UPSC in the prelims examination has already asked about a very important genetic engineering tool. This is known as Cas9 protein. What is Cas9 and in which technology is it used? This is a question for you. Now, coming to the next topic.